Colorado is known for its breathtaking views, but beneath its beauty lies mysteries that remain unsolved. Today, we'll examine 10 cases that have baffled investigators. Cases where justice is still waiting to be served. The Centennial State, a place of majestic mountains, pristine wilderness, and communities where neighbors know each other by name. But even here in this slice of American paradise, darkness can fall. And when it does, well, the shadows can be long indeed. What is it about unsolved crimes that haunts us so? Is it the lack of closure? The nagging questions that keep families awake at night? Or perhaps it's something more primal, our deep-seated need for justice in an often unjust world. For the families of these victims, time hasn't healed their wounds. It's merely stretched them across years, sometimes decades of wondering who, wondering why, and wondering if they'll ever know the truth. Our first case takes us to Bailey, Colorado. December 1st, 2017. A cold winter's evening when 17-year-old Maggie Long should have been at a concert at her high school. Instead, something, or someone, lured her home. What happened next would shock this small mountain community to its core. A promising young woman, bright, ambitious, beloved by all who knew her, would never fulfill her dreams. Never walk across the graduation stage, never experience the life that stretched before her with such promise. When authorities responded to a fire at the Long family home, they expected to find a routine house fire. What they discovered instead was something far more sinister. The home had been ransacked, items were missing, and in the ashes, they found Maggie. She had been murdered, brutally, and the house set ablaze. An attempt perhaps to cover up the crime. But fire, you see, doesn't destroy everything. It leaves traces, clues, and questions. So many questions. In 2021, nearly 4 years after Maggie's death, the FBI made a startling announcement. They classified her murder as a hate crime. Maggie, a young woman of Asian descent, may have been targeted because of her race. But even with this new classification, the case remains unsolved. The perpetrators, authorities believe there were multiple attackers, remain free. And Maggie's family continues to wait for answers that seem perpetually out of reach. Perhaps no Colorado case has captured the nation's attention quite like the murder of JonBenét Ramsey. December 26, 1996, the day after Christmas, a time when most families are still celebrating, still unwrapping presents, still basking in holiday joy. But in the Ramsey household in Boulder, Colorado, a nightmare was unfolding. A nightmare that would spawn countless theories, books, documentaries, and a media frenzy that continues to this day. A nightmare that, despite all the attention, remains unsolved. It began with a ransom note, a 3-page demand for $118,000. JonBenét's mother Patsy found it early that morning and called 911. Police arrived, searched the house but found nothing. Hours later, JonBenét's father John made the devastating discovery in the basement of their home. His 6-year-old daughter, a child beauty queen with a bright smile and golden curls, lay lifeless. She had been strangled with a garrote and suffered a skull fracture. A child's life ended in violence in what should have been the safety of her own home. In the years, the decades, since JonBenét's murder, theories have abounded. The parents, an intruder, a family friend. Each theory has been examined, dissected, debated, DNA evidence has been tested and retested as technology advances. Yet here we are, more than a quarter century later, and the case remains open. The killer unpunished, and a family forever marked by tragedy and suspicion. One wonders, will we ever know what really happened that Christmas night in Boulder? Now we turn to a more recent case. One that hasn't garnered national headlines but is no less tragic for those involved. Emriel Krantz. Just 19 years old when his body was discovered along Highway 72 in Coal Creek Canyon. It was April 2021. Spring in Colorado. A time of renewal, of rebirth. But for Emriel it was the end. His body, left discarded like refuse along the roadside, wasn't discovered for days. Days during which evidence deteriorated and leads grew cold. Who was Emriel Krantz? A young man with his whole life ahead of him, a son, a friend, someone who should have had decades more to live, to love, to experience all that life has to offer. Instead, his story ended on that lonely stretch of highway, and the chapters that should have followed, career, family, achievements, joys, sorrows, remain unwritten, erased by an act of violence that, to this day, remains unexplained and unpunished. Investigators have been frustratingly short on leads. No witnesses have come forward. No surveillance footage has surfaced. The remote location where Emriel's body was found has yielded few clues. And so, the case grows colder with each passing day. His family left to wonder not just who took their loved one from them, but why. What circumstances led to this young man's death on a desolate Colorado highway? The answers, if they exist at all, remain elusive. We travel now back to 1991, to a time before smartphones and social media, before DNA was routinely used in criminal investigations, to a case that has gone unsolved for more than 3 decades, Alicia Marie Tverberg. Her name may not be familiar to many. Her case didn't make national headlines, but her life mattered, her death mattered, and the fact that her killer has never been brought to justice, well, that matters too. The details of Alicia's murder are brutal, too brutal perhaps to recount in full. Suffice it to say that her life ended in violence, a violence that speaks to a perpetrator filled with rage, with hatred, with a disregard for human life that most of us can scarcely comprehend. And yet, despite the brutality of the crime, or perhaps because of it, investigators have been unable to identify her killer. Physical evidence from the scene, preserved for decades, has been re-examined with modern techniques, but still, no answers. For Alicia's family, the passage of time hasn't dulled their pain or their desire for justice. Each year that passes is another year without closure, another year knowing that the person who took their loved one walks free. But cold cases do get solved, sometimes years, even decades later. A new witness comes forward, a deathbed confession is made, DNA technology advances, and families who had given up hope finally get the answers they've been seeking for so long. 2019. A more recent tragedy. Kevin Garcia, gunned down in Denver. Another life ended prematurely. Another family left to grapple with grief and unanswered questions. The circumstances of Kevin's death remain shrouded in mystery. Was he targeted specifically? Was it a case of mistaken identity? A random act of violence? The answers have eluded investigators, despite their best efforts. Detectives have pieced together what they can. Witness statements, surveillance footage, physical evidence from the scene. But the puzzle remains incomplete. The crucial pieces, the ones that would identify the shooter, are missing. Suspect sketches have been circulated. Rewards have been offered for information. But so far the case remains unsolved. The shooter, whoever they may be, continues to evade justice. And Kevin's family continues to wait for answers that may never come. Denver 2017, Khobi Eiland becomes another statistic in the city's homicide records. Another life ended too soon. Another family left to wonder why. The streets of Denver, like those of any major city, can be dangerous. But for Khobi, they proved deadly. His case, now years old, has gone cold. The trail of evidence leading to his killer has grown faint, but not, investigators hope, completely invisible. What makes some cases go cold while others are solved quickly? Sometimes it's a lack of witnesses. Sometimes it's a lack of physical evidence. And sometimes, sadly, it's a lack of resources or public attention. For Khobi's family, the reasons don't matter as much as the result. Years without answers, years without justice. Years wondering if the person responsible for taking their loved one will ever be held accountable. 2018, another year, another life lost. Ijah Hamilton's death sent ripples through his community. A young man with connections, with friends, with family who loved him. Gone. The headlines at the time told of shock, of disbelief, of a community struggling to make sense of senseless violence. But headlines fade. News cycles move on. And cases like Ijah's can slip from public consciousness, even as they remain open on detectives' desks. What happened to Ijah Hamilton? The full story remains untold. The final chapter, the one that would name his killer and explain the why of it all, remains unwritten. Investigators have followed leads. They've conducted interviews. They've examined evidence. But the case remains unsolved. The person or persons responsible for Ijah's death remain at large, and justice remains elusive. 2016, Deonta McDonald. Another name, another face, another life cut short by violence in Colorado. Another family left to navigate the impossible terrain of grief without closure. Reward posters bearing Deonta's image have faded in the sun. The initial surge of tips has dwindled to a trickle, but for those who loved him, the pain remains as fresh as it was the day they learned of his death. What happens when a case goes cold? Does it mean investigators have given up? That justice will never be served? Not necessarily. Cold case units exist precisely because law enforcement recognizes that every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed. For Deonta's case, the passage of years has made the investigation more challenging. Memories fade, witnesses move away, evidence deteriorates, but hope remains that someday, somehow, the truth will emerge. 2020. A particularly disturbing case. An at-risk adult, someone particularly vulnerable, becomes the victim of aggravated assault. The details are troubling. The lack of resolution even more so. What kind of person preys on the vulnerable? On those least able to defend themselves? These are the questions that haunt investigators as they continue to search for the perpetrator of this still unsolved crime. Crime scene reports tell part of the story. Physical evidence tells another part. But the complete narrative, the one that would identify the assailant and bring them to justice, remains elusive. For the victim and their family, the lack of resolution compounds the trauma of the assault itself. Not only must they deal with the physical and emotional aftermath of violence, but they must do so knowing that the person responsible has not been held accountable. When we step back and look at the broader picture, we see that these cases are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger pattern of unsolved crimes that plague not just Colorado, but communities across the country. Denver Police Department statistics tell a sobering story. Dozens of homicides remain unsolved. Dozens of families wait for answers. Dozens of perpetrators have, so far, escaped justice. But the investigations continue. The search for truth goes on. What is the cost of an unsolved crime? For the victims and their families, it's immeasurable. The lack of closure, the unanswered questions, the knowledge that the person responsible continues to walk free. For communities, unsolved crimes erode trust. They create fear. They send a message that violence can go unpunished. And for law enforcement, each unsolved case represents a promise unfulfilled, a commitment to justice that remains incomplete. Why do some cases remain unsolved? Often it's because those who know something, witnesses, confidants, even those with just a small piece of the puzzle, remain silent, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of misplaced loyalty, perhaps because they don't realize the significance of what they know. But here's the truth. Even the smallest detail can break a case wide open. A remembered license plate, an unusual behavior noticed but not reported, a conversation overheard but dismissed as unimportant. These could be the keys that unlock these mysteries. These cases remain unsolved, but every piece of information can bring us closer to justice. If you have any leads, contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS or the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Remember, you can remain anonymous. Your identity can be protected. What matters is not who you are, but what you know. What matters is that families who have waited years, sometimes decades, for answers, might finally find the peace they've been seeking for so long. Because in the end, justice delayed need not be justice denied, not if we all do our part. Not if we all recognize that solving these cases isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about honoring the victims, about affirming that their lives mattered, that they have not been forgotten, and that we, as a society, remain committed to the truth, no matter how long it takes to find it.